Excellent. Well, good morning and welcome. If I haven't had a chance to meet you, my name is Chris, lead pastor here at Hoboken Grace. And today we are wrapping up a conversation that we have been in for the last several weeks called His Church. If you haven't been with us, we've been looking at this reality that this thing that Jesus starts, this movement that Jesus launches, has incredible potential, has at times been unstoppable in its ability to be able to bring love and life for people to understand who God is and experience God in remarkable ways. And yet, at the same time, that very same movement, when it has been hijacked by another mission, by our mission, our advancement, our idea, when that has happened, it has brought incredible destruction. And so we've been working through this book called Acts, or Acts of the Apostles is its actual title. We've been looking at this book that captures the beginning of the church, and we've been asking, okay, well, what is it that sets the church, what is it that set the early church apart? What is it that makes it His church and not our church? And we saw that our church, when it's our church, it tends to just gather, but His church goes. And doesn't just go to the places that are convenient or nice or comfortable. It steps into the darkness. And then we looked at how our church sometimes can, well, when it's our church, it becomes about moralism and legalism, whereas His church is about worship. It lives questionable lives because of how it worships Jesus. It no longer worships the things of this world. It worships Him, and so it's generous in ways that no one else is generous. It loves in these crazy ways. It loves when no one else will. And then we looked at how His church is relentless. It just will not quit. And no matter what came against it, it would not quit. And then last week, we looked at how His church, it always made the right decision. It had all the right moves, not because it had the best plan, but because it was committed to prayer. It was in sync with the Spirit. And we've been moving through this and looking at what can happen when it's our church, and then what His church looks like. And then calling ourselves to that, to say, no, we want to actually be His church inside of this community. And as we come to the end today, we're leaning into this. As a matter of fact, we've done something we've never done before here at Hoboken Grace, because as I've had conversations with you, it's remarkable how many of you have said, no, this has connected so well in my conversation with my friend. This is connected so well in my conversation with my coworker, because all of us are surrounded by people who, many of them say, I'm okay with the spirituality thing, I just don't want anything to do with the church. Some of them even say, I'm okay with the Jesus thing, I just don't want anything to do with the church, because they've experienced what happens when it becomes our church. When it becomes about our advancement, our agenda, our idea, instead of His. And so as we come to the end of this series, we've actually created a little microsite specifically for this series. It just has all the conversations that we've been walking through and some of the resources that are available as part of that. And the other night I was sitting and as I was just processing through everything that's been happening in this series, I decided to find out whether or not there was a domain available that I thought would fit this site perfectly. And so I went, typed it in. Turns out ourchurchsucks.com was available. It's no longer available, but it was available. And so we've created the site, ourchurchsucks.com, and it features all of these conversations. And so when you encounter someone who says, I'm okay with the spirituality thing, I just don't like the church thing, you can say, I know a perfect site for you. I've got the perfect place for you to be able to check out. Our church, we work through all of that stuff. And what it actually means to be his church. We also, as you walk out today, we have these coasters that we printed for you. It has the website on it, but then it also has all of the conversation titles so that you can just leave it out around your house as your friends come over. They'd be like, what in the world is this about? Why? Well, because his church understands that Jesus came to seek and to save the lost. And we want to do anything that we can to seek and to save the lost. And for those around us to realize, yeah, sometimes the mission gets hijacked, but the reality is that what he started and what he launched is incredibly beautiful. And scriptures say that the hope of glory is Christ in you. The hope of the world is that the church would be his church. And we want for our community, our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers to see that. And so today what I want to do is I want to talk through one last thing that I think is true about his church. And how sometimes that can go sideways when it becomes our church. And one of the things that can happen as we're moving through a series like this, and we're talking about the beauty of his church and what it can be, is that we can get a flawed idea of what it is that we're working towards. Now, what it is that we're working towards, it should be captured by the different things that we've talked about. But sometimes we can get this idea that, okay, we're going to create the perfect church. We're going to devote ourselves to these things, and we're going to give our life to these things, and we're going to create the perfect church. And I remember being young, and I was a young church planner. We planted Hoboken Grace when I was 27. No one should have trusted us at all. But I remember being young and thinking, okay, we're going to build the perfect church. I see all the mistakes that other people have made. We're going to build the perfect church. And as we move through this, we can get this idea, okay, we're working towards the perfect church. And Jesus called his church to be the perfect church. Listen to me. That's a trap. That's a trap. And that is not actually what Jesus called us to be. And I hate to break it to you, but all of us need to know this. There is no perfect church. And if you find one, you will ruin it. Because all of us are broken. Turn to your neighbor and say, there is no perfect church. There is no perfect church. That's not what we're working towards. Listen to me, that's not the ideal that Jesus called us to. And this is really important. Because some of you believe, and some of you grew up inside of churches that taught this, some of you believe that the power of your witness is your perfection. So some of you believe that the power of your witness is you getting it right, doing it right. And you think, okay, the world's going to know that I have a relationship with God, and the world's going to know who God is, and the world's going to want to know God because they look at how I live. And look at how I live, and I get it right, and I do it right, and so therefore, you know that I have this relationship with God, and so you're going to want a relationship with God. Again, this goes back to a flawed understanding of the Jewish scriptures and the Christian scriptures. We talked about this in week 1. The Jewish scriptures have a missiology that says you're going to be separate, you're going to be distinct, and the world's going to see the relationship that I have with you and know that I am God. That is not what he calls the church to do or to be. He says, no, you're going to go into the world. And the power of your witness is going to be found in something else. But when it becomes our church, we have this idea. Make no mistake about it. It's in all of us. We have this idea that, okay, no, the church is going to be separate and distinct over here, and we're going to be moral and legalistic, and we're going to live a right life. And so then people are going to know we have a relationship with God, and they're going to want to have a relationship with God. Here's the problem with that. Listen to me. You can't do it. You can't do it. You're broken. But we have this idea that, no. The power of our witness is our perfection. The power of our witness is our purity. That's the power of our witness. I mean, look, we're able to live life the right way. We're able to do it right. We're able to keep the rules. We're better than. This is the power of our witness. But you can't do it. So you know what happens? When brokenness shows up, you know what the church does? It hides it. It covers it up. Why? Well, we can't let the world see that. We'll lose the power of our witness. You say, why are there so many cover-ups inside the church? This is why. We're separate, we're distinct. Look at us, look how good we are. We've got it right, we did it right. We kept the rules. We lived better. But they can't do it. And so they cover it up. And by the way, that's not attractive to the world. You may think it is, it's not. Because the world does one of two things. The world either, number one, looks at it and says, I can never do that, so that's not for me. Or number two, the world looks at it and says, you're a hypocrite. I know what's behind that shell. And they're right. The world looks at it and says, you're no better than me. And they're right. And the church says, oh my goodness, we're losing the power of our witness. No. You were wrong about where the power was the entire time. The power of our witness is not in our perfection. The power of our witness is in our experience of grace in the midst of our brokenness. The power of our witness is grace and mercy and forgiveness. The power of our witness is that even though I'm still broken, I have a relationship with Jesus. The power of our witness is that even when I wanted nothing to do with him, even when I walked away from him, he came for me. And that his grace is new every morning. His grace is sufficient. His mercy. That's the power of our witness. That's the good news. The good news is not, hey, you can get your life right and look like us. That's the good news that the church over and over again has presented to the world. Hey, you can get your life right and look like us. And the world's like, I don't really want that. And Jesus says, that's not your message. You're my ambassador to the world to let them know that God was in Jesus, reconciling the world to himself, not counting men's sins against them. My witness is not that I don't sin. My witness is that my sin doesn't get counted against me. Some of you are like, I don't know if that's true. What's a different conversation? But that's grace. Some of you are here exploring this. That's the message of Jesus. That he gave his life for you when you wanted nothing to do with him. And he has paid for anything that would stand between you and the Father so that you can be reconciled to the Father, and the Father will not count your sins against you. And you live every day drowning in grace and mercy. That's the power of our witness. But in order for the world to see that, they have to see our brokenness. If we keep hiding it, they can't see grace and forgiveness. Listen to me, parents. If you're here and you're a parent, this is true of your kids too. If you never let your kids see your brokenness, if you hide behind this shell over here, one of two things will happen for your kids. And some of you grew up with parents like this, so you know that I'm right. One of two things will happen with your kids. Either one, they'll look at it and say, I can't live up to that. I can't do it, so I'm out. Or number two, they'll say, you're a hypocrite, and I know what's behind that mask. Your kids don't need to see your perfection. They need to see you experience forgiveness and grace and mercy. That's good news. That's the good news. That's why it's called the good news. And that is attractive to the world. But that means we have to change what we think of as the ideal. The ideal is not perfection. The ideal is a group of broken people who are engaging in community together in such a way that there is grace and forgiveness and reconciliation. And so, from the beginning of the church, from the very beginning of the church, you don't find a perfect church. From the beginning of the church, there's no example of, hey, listen, look at these guys. They had it all together. No, as a matter of fact, over and over again, Paul's writing to churches that he planted, by the way, that he was the leader of, that he set up, and he's writing to them and saying, guys, wait. You're blowing it here. Wait, you got to course correct here. Wait, you're still broken. This is what you know. And you see, it's from the very beginning, brokenness is part of the story. You see it even inside of leadership. In Galatians chapter 2, Peter is actually called out for his hypocrisy. Listen to what it says. Galatians 2, verse 11. It says, but when Peter came to Antioch, I had to oppose him to his face, for what he did was very wrong. When he first arrived, he ate with the Gentile Christians who were not circumcised. But afterwards, when some friends of James came, Peter wouldn't eat with the Gentiles anymore. He was afraid of criticism from all these people who insisted on the necessity of circumcision. As a result, other Jewish Christians followed Peter's hypocrisy, and even Barnabas was led astray by their hypocrisy. And so we see it's not just that there's brokenness inside the church as the church launches, but it's inside of the leadership. Peter himself has to be confronted about his brokenness. And so we don't see Jesus setting up an ideal that there will never be brokenness. No, the ideal is something different. He actually teaches his disciples about this. And I love this because the fact that he teaches them this plan lets us see that he anticipates that there will be sin and brokenness inside the church. So in Matthew chapter 18, Jesus is teaching his disciples. He says, okay, this is how it's going to work for you. This is what my church is going to look like. This is his church. This is how I want for you to function. This is the plan. If another believer sins against you, in other words, sin is going to be part of the equation. Brokenness is going to be part of the equation. You're not going to be able to get rid of it. So here's how you deal with it. This is how you work through it. Go privately and point out the offense. If the other person listens and confesses it, you have won that person back. But if you are unsuccessful, take one or two others with you and go back again, so that everything you say may be confirmed by 2 or 3 witnesses. If the person still refuses to listen, take your case to the church. Then if he or she won't accept the church's decision, treat that person as a pagan or a corrupt tax collector. And so he lays out this plan. He says, here's the reality of it, guys. There's going to be brokenness inside of my church. There's going to be brokenness in what we're doing. There's going to be sin. So here's what you need to do. And if we're going to be his church, we have to embrace this. We have to give up the ideal of perfection. That's not going to happen. It's not even what we're working towards. We're working towards something different. We're working towards this. And his church doesn't ignore sin. It doesn't act like sin doesn't matter. No, we understand every sin comes prepackaged with circumstances. And those circumstances bring destruction to ourselves and the world around us. And so we don't have to earn God's approval, and we don't stop sinning so we can earn God's approval. We stop sinning because we don't want to experience that consequence, and we want to worship and love him. That's why we stop sinning. We want to worship and love him. We trust him. We want to follow him. Not because of empty moralism or legalism, but because of worship and love. And we call each other out of that. Why? Because, well, inside of that same book of Galatians, he says, why would you go back and make yourself a slave to something that was destroying you? You've been set free. Why would you go back to something you know brings destruction? No. And so his church doesn't ignore sin. It doesn't act like sin doesn't matter. It addresses it. Now, before we talk about addressing it, the first thing that you have to do is you have to pause here, because the first step in this process or this plan that Jesus gives us, he says, if another believer sins against you, that means the first step is this: we have to address the situation. In other words, you have to ask, is this a sin? So let's say you're inside a dinner group, and hopefully you didn't come into dinner group with the wrong expectation that you were going to experience a perfect dinner group. Again, if you find a perfect dinner group, you've ruined it. It's not going to happen. But you find yourself in group, and all of a sudden someone says something. Someone shares a political statement that's opposed to your political views. You're like, oh, they sinned. They sinned against me. They sinned against me. I need to address this sin. No, they did not sin against you. They have a different opinion than you. And you need to address it. Okay, is this actually a sin thing or an opinion? And so your spouse comes home and they forgot the milk for the 15th time. You're like, after 5, it's a sin. Definitely after 5, it's a sin. No, you just married a very forgetful person. Should have thought about that. But you have to address the situation. Okay, is this actually a sin? Is this actually something God speaks to? And when it is, when they're dishonest, when they're not caring, when we act in unloving ways, yeah, Jesus says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to address it. And so we address it personally. We address it personally. We go and talk to the person about it. Not 5 other people. We go and talk to the person about it. You say, well, I'm not really talking to other people about it. I just want to get advice on how to handle the conversation. Right. And when I was younger, well, the longer I've been a pastor, the more I push back on that. This idea, I just got to talk to someone else about how to be able to handle the conversation. No. That's not what Jesus actually called you to do. It's not actually what he teaches us to do. He says, no, I want you to go have the conversation. Well, I don't know if I'm prepared to have the conversation. Well, he actually says that the spirit that rose Jesus from the dead has been placed within you. And maybe we need to trust him to be able to do something in that conversation that we can't. And so go and have the conversation with the person to be able to address what happened. And then he says, if in the midst of that conversation there's not clarity, then you bring others into it. Now, let me stop for a second, because I want to talk about this idea of addressing it personally. And I want to talk to you about something that we practice here at Hoboken Grace. I'm not going to go into it at length because we've talked about it at length in the past, but I want to remind you of it, or for those of you who haven't heard it, to teach you for the first time. Because there's a process that we've learned here at Hoboken Grace that has been really beneficial as it pertains to addressing these moments. The way that we phrase it is this: OIC. It's just 3 different letters. It stands for 3 words. OIC. It also kind of works like, oh, I see, as you're in the conversation. But the O is this. The O is observation. So you realize, okay, I have to address this. I need to speak to this. I'm not going to ignore it. I'm not going to act like it doesn't matter. And I realize, okay, this is actually a sin. I think this is a sin situation. I'm going to talk about it. O is observation. Observation is where you share the facts of the situation. It needs to be only the facts. Now, here's why I say this. The second you exaggerate in observation, you lose. The second you exaggerate, you lose. And so you're in a conversation with someone, you feel like they have been dishonest, and so you come and say, hey, the other day you said this to me, I feel like I've been... That's very different. That's stating the fact. As opposed to, I feel like you're just not honest. Well, anytime you begin to exaggerate like that, the other person, I've experienced this before with people who are late. So rather than saying, oh, last week you were late 3 times, you come in and say, hey, listen, you're always late. And immediately, what's their response? I was on time last Tuesday. I'm not always late. I was on time last Tuesday. Okay, but that was the only time that you were on time for the last 2 weeks. It doesn't matter. I was on time last Tuesday. You said I was always late. I'm not always late. The entire conversation now becomes about your exaggeration, and you accomplish nothing. Nothing. So in observation, you have to make sure that you stick to the facts. Do not exaggerate. If you're married, you need to pay attention to what I'm talking about right now. Then comes the I. I is interpretation. And the I is where you communicate humility in confrontation. And you need to communicate humility in confrontation. All of us, I don't care who you are, all of us are incredibly proud in confrontation. We are incredibly arrogant. In other words, we think coming into confrontation that we know exactly what happened, and even more so, this is where real pride comes in. Not only do we think we know exactly what happened, we think we know the other person's heart. You've already judged their heart and why they did it and what's behind it. You think you know. You have no idea. And one of the things that our staff has learned is that if we'll come into this moment with humility, we estimate that about 80% of the time we're wrong. Isn't that shocking? That's how arrogant we were at the beginning. We thought, oh, maybe we'll be wrong about 10% of the time. No, we're wrong all the time. We're wrong about what happens sometimes. We're wrong all the time about what's behind it or the heart in it. All the time. And we have these conversations a lot. And so you need to come into it humble. When you come into it humble, you offer not just one interpretation, you offer multiple interpretations. At least 3. And so you're late. I don't know if something's happening with your car. I don't know if or someone lied to you. Like, I don't know if I didn't understand the situation. I don't know if I'm not getting the right information. Now, I don't know if you just weren't honest with me. So you're offering multiple interpretations. You don't know. And one of them, at least one of them, and you might have to work really hard at this, but at least one of them needs to be positive. It can't be 3 negatives. I feel like you weren't honest with me, so maybe you don't love God, or you've just given into evil. At least one of them has to be positive, or somewhat positive. And then comes C, which is clarification. Help me understand. And then you listen. Confrontation is as much about listening as it is about sharing. And so Jesus says, my church doesn't ignore or belittle sin. It addresses it. It recognizes that it's going to be there. It's not surprised by it. It sees it coming. It prepares for it. And so we address it personally. If there's no resolution inside of that, and as you get to clarification, if there's no resolution, one person feels like it was wrong, other person, then he says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to bring in 2 witnesses. Now, these 2 witnesses are not people who witnessed what happened. These 2 witnesses are basically a little mini jury system. This is what Jesus does. Jesus says, inside of my church, we're going to work off this little jury system. So you're going to bring 2 other people into that conversation to be able to hear the conversation and decide, okay, no, I think this person is right or that person's right. I think it was wrong or I don't think it was wrong. I think it is a sin or I think it's an opinion, whatever it may be. And so after you've had that conversation, if you're still not on the same page, you don't walk away from each other and give up on each other. You bring others into it. Why? Because his church doesn't quit on each other. It pursues, it pushes through for reconciliation. And so you bring the other 2 in and you're sharing that. And I can tell you, I've been in a lot of those situations where this person's like, hey, they sinned against me, and they'll start to describe it, and I'm like, that's not sin. I've actually been in many of those situations where they say, hey, they sinned against me, and they share what happened, and I said, no. What they did was actually loving you. And you didn't want to hear what they had to say, but it was the most loving thing that they could do. He says you need to bring witnesses, and then if there's still not clarity, if you're still not reconciliation, then you bring it to a larger jury. You bring it to the church to be able to work through, okay, what's right here? How do we call each other to what's right? How do we reconcile inside this situation? And then sometimes people get thrown off by the way that he ends it, because he says, then if he or she won't accept the church's decision, treat that person as a pagan or a corrupt tax collector. And they come to the end of it like, and if they won't accept it, and if they're still not reconciliation, then treat them as a pagan or a tax collector. And people will hear that and say like, oh, you want nothing to do with them. Yeah, that's the message of Jesus, right? That he wanted nothing to do with pagans or tax collectors. No. Jesus' message is clear. He's pursuing, loving the pagans and the tax collectors. He's not saying, oh, you just write them off. No, he's just saying you just interact with them like they don't really know who Jesus is. They haven't really stepped into that relationship yet. They don't know his grace and forgiveness. You interact with them like that. All of it moving towards, all of it pressing towards reconciliation. Jesus says, no, inside of my church, there's going to be sin. And inside of my church, there's going to be broken relationships. My church isn't going to be perfect and whitewashed over here. No, it's broken. Inside of my church, there's going to be broken relationships. But here's the thing. This is what's going to make us different. We're not going to give up on each other, and we are going to pursue reconciliation through forgiveness. The power of our witness has never been and never will be perfection. The power of our witness is grace and forgiveness. The grace and forgiveness we've received from him, the grace and forgiveness we give to one another. The power of our witness is not that there won't be broken relationships. The power of our witness is that those relationships will be restored. But for the world to see that, we have to decide. not as an organization. We have to decide as an assembly. You have to decide as the church to be his church. Not to hide, not to ignore, to reconcile. Not to hide, not to ignore, not to walk away from, to reconcile. So that then the world can see the power of our witness. Will you pray with me? Father, as we come to the end of this, I pray that there will be an excitement. I pray that you would stir up within us a passion to be that church, to be your church. Understanding it's not going to be perfect. But you never expected it to be. Jesus, I thank you that your dream for your church was not perfection, but reconciliation. Grace, forgiveness. Father, I thank you that you have demonstrated that to us so remarkably through Jesus. And I pray that you would allow us to demonstrate that to each other and to the world around us because of Jesus. And it's in his name we pray. Amen.